Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we've got some cool music. We've got some fun writing stuff to do. Let's have at it, I suppose. So it's been a little while. It's been a little while since I've been on. Not because I haven't been writing, just because I haven't been streaming it. Just not having a chance or a quiet room or whatever to go away and do it. But I have that today, and as you can see, I've got a fair amount of a little chunk of chapter 20 completed, and I'm going to be going ahead and working on the rest of chapter 20. I don't have a crazy long amount of time to be streaming in today, but I've got a little bit of time to go away and maybe do a writing sprint, maybe two. It'll depend entirely on when my wife gets back. She's waiting to leave work, so she's probably going to be another 45 minutes to an hour. I mean, even from the last time that I streamed, like, things have come on a fair bit. I think the last time I streamed, I was on a couple of thousand views, maybe, on Shadowbinder. I'm now on 13,500 views. My average reads per chapter is about 760. But looking at the most recent couple of chapters, it seems that I've got about 400 to 500 concurrent readers at the moment who are reading every chapter, which is pretty awesome. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I've got about 400 followers, which tracks with the number of people who are reading it kind of regularly, and 61 favorites. So it's doing really well. And as mentioned before, like, I am on that Rising Stars list, which is, for the successful web serial on Royal Road, that is the most important thing. 32nd on the list, which isn't bad at all. That's out of 50 for overall stories in the whole website. The object would be to get in the top 10 and get on the front page for a period of weeks, hopefully. That would really take the story on to the next level. In terms of a Patreon update, we're up to 3 patrons, which is super duper cool. The actual status of the chapters is struggling a little bit, I'm not gonna lie. The tiers promise 3 chapters ahead and 5 chapters ahead, but I'm struggling to keep up with that at the moment, to be honest. So at the moment I'm only 1 chapter ahead, so I need to crank out another 4 chapters ahead of time to be able to keep up with the Patreon schedule. But I've got today and tomorrow, so I'm hoping today I'm going to be able to crank out or finish this chapter, which will take another 1,200 odd words, and then this evening later on write a second chapter today, which will bring me up to 3 advanced chapters before tomorrow, which is when my next release day is. and then hopefully by then I'll have like a good amount of chat. Make the Patreon worth it, and hopefully steer a few more people that way. I am thinking there's very little benefit of hanging around too much. That I don't have a crazy amount of time. And I just need to get started. So in the last chapter we had Raylan and Kasek burning the shack. And to be honest, that chapter needs a little bit of that 1920 chapter, chapter 18 even, needs a little bit of work. It's not it doesn't make for the best chapter. There's a few inconsistencies with the world building, primarily around the actual what the shack is and what it's made out of. I had it raised in feedback of the comments that, you know, a shack in a marshland really isn't going to last for very long at all, which is totally reasonable. It wouldn't, it would rot. But I had kind of accounted for that with basically there's an in-world reason why it is still alive that hasn't been revealed yet, but there's also real world building. Realised that I've got baked into the world building and onto the research that I did, so that it's kind of like there's a backup if I choose not to use that other world building element that somebody's already guessed that in the comments. And in Norway there are buildings treated with pine wood, right, that have stood in these damp forests for 1,000+ years. Like, they're old buildings and they're still surviving now. And the reason that they're able to do that is because they treat it's Norwegian spruce and Scots pine. And the reason that they do that is because they treat the pine over a series of years. They do this really cool thing where they strip a ring from the bark, and then the tree tries to heal itself with the resin, and it soaks all of the trunk in that section down with the resin. And then they do the next bit, and it soaks through the next bit, and they gradually work their way through over a period of years until that tree has been fully soaked and treated with resin. Then they cut the top off, and they have this really, really rot-resistant piece of wood. And there are still shacks that are 1,000+ years old. Like, we're talking shacks that were built in the like AD 700 that are still standing and look incredible. So I'd kind of checked it, but what happened was I'd done that world building and that pre-prep a couple of weeks beforehand. Like, the shack scene was one of those scenes that I'd had planned out before. I'd done that world building, and then I wrote the chapter away from my notes, and basically away from being able to check up on how I'd done that. And while I was zero drafting it, I just had it as a normal wooden shack. I didn't add in that extra little spicy bit of like realism and world detail, to make it kind of consistent and make sense. So that chapter, that part needs a re-edit. And also that same commenter, actually, you can tell it's somebody who really hones in on the world building, which is really cool. What inconsistencies like that, if I haven't already thought of it, mechanism to like edit the book and just make it a little bit better. The other thing they talked about was language drift. It's incredibly unlikely that Raylan and Kasek would speak the same language, considering they're separated by about 1,000 years. But again, that was something that I'd already prepped for and planned for, because it's one of those questions you ask yourself in your world building. Okay, what language are these characters speaking? Kasek's from this one place, Raylan is from another. But more importantly, and more crucially, because they are actually geographically, they're from a very similar place, but they're separated by 1,000 years of time, and you'd expect the language to be a little bit different. So somebody's raised the prospect of language drift, and it's a very, very good point. But having languages where there is no drift isn't impossible, especially in isolated communities where there's not a lot of impact from elsewhere. And what we have to remember is Raylan is from a place that has been isolated and trapped, and has been the last human settlement for at least 800 years. And in places that are isolated, language drift is really, really minimal. For example, Icelandic, because of the isolation of Iceland, language drift in Iceland has been very, very minimal. Which is why I opted to keep them the same. Or why I let myself keep them the same, because obviously it's more convenient. But there is a world building reason for it that has backing in the real world as well. But those are all things that you kind of have to like think about and consider and stuff. Our world building, and luckily, I was ahead of the curve on those a little bit, which is good because I not always am. So on the list of things I have to do, there's editing for chapter 18. But I need to catch up beforehand. I need to get the whole story to a much better place. So Windows in the right order, otherwise it doesn't load the stuff properly because I'm only on one setup. So chapter 20 opens with a little bit of exposition, a little bit of internal monologuing in Kasek's part. The pace so far of the story of the first 20 chapters has been fairly breakneck, with a few like key points to slow down. But now is a good time to wind back the pace a little bit. These last few chapters have been a bit slower, have been a bit more introspective, there's been less action, and that's been very intentional, right? Because if you're constantly at the action, and you're trying to create this really, really high tension situation, but if you're constantly at it, the tension bleeds away because the reader gets used to being in this heightened state. So kind of thrown everything at them for the first 20 chapters with some breaks, and now we can pull back a little bit and ease off the throttle, give people some reading room, give them something a little bit different, which is where the shack stuff had come from, before we start to rack it up again. As the first sort of stage of our little rescue arc in book 1 begins. So yeah, wait. Lie down. Come on. speaking. Literally always the way. You start writing, you get 3 words in, and immediately you're interrupted by something else. I can't really complain though. It's been my birthday recently, and what's just come in post is some One Piece, an Ace figure, and a Luffy figure from some, good friends of mine. Which is really, really cool of them. That's awesome. Just caught us by surprise is all. Trying to bloody... just not happening. The dog's not having it. The postman's not having it. This is the 3rd time because he was here when I was trying to start streaming in the first place. Like, nobody's having it today. Nobody wants anything to do with it. Okay, so Toph is speaking. Just remembering whether or not I've given a name to this town. Doesn't look like it, which is fine, because I've got the map. Totally fine. No, I could probably... We can hoover that down, right? Yeski, we can do Maccabee maybe? That makes a lot more sense. Place. Oh, and there is my phone, so